Go across to Ashwin Sanghi, who joins us. Ashwin Sanghi, of course, US best-selling author. He needs no introductions. He's also a commentator, a columnist who has written extensively on issues that touch our everyday lives. Now, the reason we are speaking to you, Mr. Sanghi, tonight is to ask you on speaking to the minority community tonight and telling us what is the message from Ram Nagri to the Muslim minority community. So thank you, Mr. Sanghi, for speaking to me, and I want to begin by asking you, January 22 is being seen as Bharat's pivot to its civilizational past. Now, please put this into context for our viewers, specifically those who are today a little perturbed and might be constituting the minority.
Well, Rahul, first of all, thanks for having me here. But, there are, the Pran Pratishtha is ultimately, what is it? It's ultimately imbuing life into the deity. But in some ways, this Pran Pratishtha is also injecting fresh energy into Sanatan Dharma. So in that sense, this event cannot be considered just a religious moment, but a civilizational one. Some may see the rituals as triumphalism of sorts, but frankly, I see it as a celebration of survival. So many of the belief systems that sort of profess about one true God have had a historical advantage over pagan belief systems. Whether it was Zoroastrianism in Iran, or it was the Mithraic cults of Rome, or whether it was the Egyptian deities and the Greek gods, all of those were wiped out. So in that sense, the rise of Ram Janmabhoomi and the consecration of Ram Lalla symbolizes survival more than anything else.
Survival more than anything else, because the legacy would have been extinguished. Now we can go into why and all of that, and I don't want to dredge up old wounds, but let me just quickly ask you, could this movement have succeeded without having acquired a political avatar or color?
In some ways, Rahul, I don't know. Before I answer that question, I really wish that it hadn't taken on a political dimension, because this is something which I really would have loved in case this had, instead of being a political dispute leading to a judicial issue, I wish that this was something which had been arrived at in the manner of a negotiation between two communities. I mean, we all know that the estimate of Sitaram Goel is around 3,000 temples having been destroyed. And obviously, you cannot right every wrong of history. But there are a few places, whether they are Somnath, Ayodhya, Kashi, or Mathura, where there is very strong sentimental value attached. And to see the destruction that has happened in the past, you don't need to go to these places. You can simply go to the Quwwatul Islam Mosque next to the Qutub Minar, where there is a signboard saying that 27 Hindu and Jain temples were demolished in order to build the mosque. Now, as I said, you cannot attempt to right every wrong, but then neither can you expect that a wounded civilization can ignore all its open wounds. So it, in some ways, baffles me that why could India's Muslim leaders not rise above this and say, hey, listen, there are maybe 2 or 3 places where a negotiated settlement needs to happen because of the sentimental value that these places hold for the Hindus. It's almost as though the entire community meekly surrendered to a group of antiquated leaders, and that is what really pains me, that I wish that this had been in the nature of a settlement between the two communities that could have in some ways strengthened those bonds.
Well, so you're essentially saying that politicization was necessary because of the entrenched obduracy on part of a minority community and its political patrons. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And, think about this, Rahul. I'm going to elaborate on this for a minute more. Look at the world around us. countries that were once welcoming migration from Muslim lands are today shutting their doors. Look at the rise of the right-leaning parties in Europe, and look at the groundswell of support for Trump in America. All of these should be eye openers. Bharat, in its own clumsy and very messy way, has welcomed and assimilated all faiths through the centuries. And Sanatan Dharma, with all its alleged faults, has been really instrumental in establishing a plural ethos. Now, this was the moment for the Muslims of India to lead the way in establishing a gentler and a more flexible and a more updated and a kinder version of Islam. Remember, it sounds odd to you maybe, but the truth is that it took 14 centuries for the reformation to happen in Christianity.
That's true.
And
Martin
today,
Luther, 1400.
Islam is exactly 14 centuries from its origin. So this is the starting point of that time when it should undergo that reformation. And who better to lead that reformation than the very enlightened Indian Muslim?
Okay.
Because some of the greatest movement of knowledge happened from ancient Bharat through the Arab traders, merchants, as well as the intellectuals from the Arab world. So this is a reformation which needs to happen, and I wish that this had been the starting point of that reformation.
Well, so supremacism should be eschewed, and if reformation, however, Mr. Sanghi, doesn't happen, will the restoration of Ram Lalla to his Nagri heal wounds of, to paraphrase you, of Hindu civilization that you are referring to?
Well, as I started out by saying that, India's political landscape is, it's loud and messy, Rahul. The truth of the matter is that this event has been simultaneously celebrated, opposed, revered, derided, and even feared. Even the four Shankaracharyas have spoken in conflicting voices. But then the truth is that debate and dissent are the very essence of Sanatan Dharma. We've never recognized any single church, pope, or holy book as denoting our supreme authority. And who denotes or who decides whether the Shaiva or Vaishnava or Shakta path is right? And how did the Buddha come to be absorbed as the ninth avatar of Vishnu? And which of the 300 versions of the Ramayana is right? And we have even the Rig Veda questioning whether God even knows the universe's origins. We have the Astika schools such as the Sankhya questioning the very existence of God. So the disagreements and the noise around the Ram Mandir may carry on, but all of this noise should be celebrated as symbols of the plurality and the very contradictions that make Sanatan Dharma.
That is actually very well put, viewers. I think you just heard Smita Prakash talking about the fact that India is a noisy democracy and therefore you hear all these pluralities of opinions. But let me ask you, Mr. Sanghi, Ayodhya is behind us. So Muslim intent now will be tested again, at least in two other contexts, Mathura and Kashi. What should be the community's approach here now?
No, I genuinely believe that, as I said earlier, I believe that if the leadership of the Muslim community had been far thinking, then they would have used the opportunity of Ram Janmabhoomi to actually cement their ties with the majority by proactively working towards a resolution of these two or three disputed sites.
Okay.
Now, the problem is that by adopting a rigid posture on the Babri Masjid issue, they painted themselves into a corner. And as you rightly said, the disputes in Kashi and Mathura are no less contentious.
They're before the Supreme Court.
What was that? The Places of Worship Act of 1991. The idea was to freeze the religious character of various places using 1947 as a cutoff year. But when you become obstinate regarding key places, then it will open the floodgates to litigation regarding many more spots. So do really Indian Muslims need to fight over these 2 or 3 spots, or would they rather fight over 2 or 300 spots? What really is my fear is that now you may have the possibility of many more sites coming up for discussion. What could have been a very amicable settlement between two communities, between the two major communities of Bharat. Instead, it may not go in that direction, and
Well,
that is something which I'm not too happy about.
yeah, that is actually worrying, Mr. Sanghi. That's very worrying. Now, how do we sort of pull back from this brink? I mean, if you're saying that there's perhaps going to be a little bit more of a conflict, how do we resolve this, salvage this situation, for the lack of a better word, going forward?
Well, I mean, you know, let me put it this way. I genuinely believe, Rahul, that in some ways, Ram transcends religion. I mean, how else do you explain Ram being described in 300 versions of a Ramayana? And even forget, let's say, Valmiki's Ramayana or Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas or Vyasa's Adhyatma Ramayana, all the Hindu versions. But what explains, for example, Badauni's Persian version, the Razmanama, or the Mapila Ramayana, which was the Muslim Ramayana? And why is, for example, Indonesia, which is a country with the world's largest Muslim population, still celebrating a piece of literature called the Ramayana Kakavina with mask dances? Why does Angkor Wat have the most popular Ramayana scenes depicted on its wall? Why is Thailand's monarch still known as Rama the Tenth? And, I mean, how many of us know that the ancient capital of Siam, and by the way, that word Siam itself comes from the word Sham, which is the complexion of Ram. And why was the capital known as Ayutthaya? And why do Malaysian Muslims perform the shadow puppet show, which is based on the Hikayat Seri Rama? So, in that sense, Ram may not be part of their religious identity, but he continues to be part of their cultural identity. And this is something which India's Muslims will also need to be able to come around to. That there are certain places which which have a very strong emotional connect with the majority community. It is better to settle those two or three places rather than allowing this to be carried on and allowing matters to escalate where, the blanket protection that is offered today by the Places of Worship Act, suddenly we find that has suddenly been removed, and we
And
now
then there
have
is
a elongated period of legal disputes.
legal disputes, and perhaps even, people running around with spades and shovels. But luckily, RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat has cautioned the Hindu community against doing that. Says no need to look for mosques under or mandirs under every mosque, etc., etc. So let's just hope that better sense prevails, even though we're not seeing it so much. But nonetheless, Mr. Sanghi, I get the sense you're placing the onus only on one side. Is it fair to put the onus only on Muslims to ensure harmony in this country?
Well, I mean, in the sense that I genuinely believe that one duty of the Hindus is not to treat this moment as a triumphant moment. That is very important. Because I genuinely believe that it is that while we want to preserve Sanatan Dharma, and while we would really like that in places which are important to us would eventually come back to us, we would not like our Muslim brothers and sisters to feel a sense of insecurity. And genuinely, there are those on the other side of the ideological lines who believe that this particular moment marks the beginning of a Hindu Rashtra of sorts. But very often they forget that Bharat is plural because of Hinduism. They forget that the framers of our constitution were not looking at a secular state in which the government would stay out of the religious ambit. Because if India were truly secular, then donations from Hindu temples could never have been appropriated by successive governments. So what they were looking at was a plural society where all faiths would be treated equally. And they deliberately omitted the word secular from the preamble. So now, frankly, whether you call it Ram Rajya or Hindu Rashtra, to my mind, it doesn't matter, because the intrinsic spirit is one of accommodation and mutual respect. And that's the reason why sketches of Ram, Lakshman, and Sita were incorporated into the pages that spoke of fundamental rights in the Constitution.
What eminent sense you actually make, Mr. Sanghi. Thank you. You've spoken very openly, and I think the viewers are getting a comprehensive sense.